You know, JD, I've been noticing some strange things here of late. It seems to me that you're not acting the way you usually do. You look just like Mr. Mash, sound just like Mr. Mash, but you don't act right. It's like you've been replaced.
What makes you say that?
I figured you'd point at me and shriek.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you rather me do that?
Would you prefer to point and shriek?
If you want me to, I'll do it.
Okay, point and shriek. You sound like a mule that's been stuck.
My voice will give out.
How often do you hear the term pod person just in everyday speech?
Given the fact that I'm a co-host of a podcast, I hear that quite a bit.
Oh, pod person, ha 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 ha. One of those phrases that has entered the vernacular through pop culture. A pod person is anybody who looks like someone you know but acts in some ineffably wrong way.
Right.
What film do we have to thank for that?
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, it's a story that's been told multiple times on screen. It's one of those movies they remake every 20 years.
The first one was 56,
Second
and I
one
think
was
77?
77. About every 20 years they remake this damn movie. It's one of those stories that obviously resonates with people. The root of this idea, if you will, was a book from 1954 by an author named Jack Finney. The book was called The Body Snatchers. In the book, it's more of a doomsday scenario because the pod people die after 5 years. So the idea is that the pods come to a planet, they replicate everybody on the planet, and then after 5 years, everybody dies and it's a desolate, abandoned, inhabitable world. And the pods just move on to the next world. They just float along on the winds of space. The original book has a happy ending. They scare off the pods, which is quite different from the majority of the film adaptations.
Yeah, but the film adaptations, I feel, have the right ending.
It's usually a downbeat ending. Once it starts, it's pretty much impossible to stop it.
Right.
Very insidious invasion. The majority of people don't notice until it's too late. You consider this a horror story, right?
Yeah. Heavy into sci-fi elements as well, but it's more horror than sci-fi.
We're going to be talking about the different adaptations of the story, and we're going to throw in a couple other things that are maybe worth mentioning. Let's go back to Santa Mira for the first invasion.
Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant super scope screen. From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spreads. As the unimaginable becomes real, the impossible becomes true.
What's the movie about, man? 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
These pods...
Do it like Christopher Walken.
Well...
These pods.
These pods.
They come from space.
Come from space. They take over the human race.
Miles Binnell, he's a doctor who lives in Santa Mira, and his patients come to him and say, well, first it's a little boy says that my mother isn't my mother. A friend of a friend comes and says something strange. My father isn't acting like himself. It looks like him, it sounds like him, but it's not him. And at first he dismisses them. Then he starts to notice strange things too. A friend finds a body, a seemingly dead body, that looks just like them. And soon it becomes apparent what's going on here. Yes, giant sea pods from outer space have come while you sleep. They produce copies of you, and these copies replace you. And they look like you, and they sound like you, but they're emotionless, they're inhuman. Not too long ago, we did an episode about alien invasion movies. Mm-hmm. And in most of those, it's a flying saucer comes and starts blowing shit up. Mm-hmm. But this isn't an invasion like that. Subtle invasion. As I said, most people don't even know it's happening until it's too late. I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like people believing that their loved ones have been replaced with identical copies is a very common psychosis. Mm-hmm. So the film plays on that, too. And something else that this original version, which is, in all honesty, my favorite of these four movies.
I disagree.
I know. Makes this movie work really well. Like a lot of 50s monster movies, it's set in this idyllic small town. It's one of those towns where everybody knows each other.
It's one of those towns where I've always wanted to live. I've always wanted to live in a town like this.
I don't know if they exist in real life. They might just exist in movies.
They did exist at one time, back in the 50s.
Yeah. The local cop is on first name basis with everybody. There's a scene in this movie where a person is in Miles, the main character's basement, the oil company guy, and he's fine with this guy just entering his house unannounced. He doesn't think that's weird. Maybe it was the time, maybe it was the place, but setting what is very much of a nightmarish scenario in this ideal little setting makes a lot of sense. How do the pods work?
Take the shape of someone who's sleeping.
Yeah, in the later films they show explicitly the pod's method. In this first one, it's a little more implied. A pod comes, it spits out a copy of a person. As the person sleeps, the copy awakes. What happens to the original after that? We don't know in this original movie. Somehow they are disappeared.
The special effects, where the pod person is forming.
Yeah.
That one scene.
The foam coming out of the pod.
All of that. I would expect to see that stuff in something from the 80s. In the 50s?
Yeah, the effects are good in this film. The design of the pod is so intuitive. There aren't a lot of special effects in this movie. The pods look great. On its face, I guess it is kind of silly. It's a giant seed pod, but I don't know, it works in the film.
Yeah.
To me, undeniably a horror film. This is top 20 best horror films of all time material. The story preys on some really common fears, because as we said, you're replaced when you sleep, which is something we all have to do. What's the longest you've ever stayed awake?
I would say 48 hours. I think I've made it once.
One time I was awake. I had a long night. I had an early morning the next day. And it was another long day. 3 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting on the commode and drifting. So I'd been awake for 30-some hours. We humans are creatures of habit, and if you go too long without getting sleep, you start to fade. The characters in this film, they can't sleep at all. When we're sleeping, we're at our most vulnerable. And that's a phobia that a lot of horror movies play on. Everything from Dracula to Nightmare on Elm Street and more. What do you think is the scariest moment in this original movie?
That scene with the pod. Now you're seeing what it does. You're witnessing, oh god, if I go to sleep, I'm going to turn into one of these things.
The scariest moment for me is when Miles and Becky have been chased all over the town by the pod people, and they're hiding in a cave or a mine or something. He leaves the girl in the cave for a minute, and when he comes back, he kisses Becky. Just that quickly, he realizes she has been replaced. The direction in this film is great. This movie was directed by Don Siegel, who would later make Dirty Harry. That close-up on Kevin McCarthy's face when he realizes that quickly it's already happened. The scariest thing to me about this movie is that the aliens don't look like aliens. In the later adaptations, as the films go on, the Body Snatchers, the pod people, they get more alien and more monster-like, and in this one, they really don't act very strange. The cop and the doctor corner Miles and Becky in his office, and they're trying to convince them so much easier.
Yeah, but I think that's my biggest problem with this film.
They don't act like monsters?
That it's inconsistent. Some scenes you'll see them, and they interact like regular humans, but then other times you see them, they act like the robotic.
From what I recall, most of the time they really just act like normal people, and to me, that's the scariest part. They'll look like us. That's the most paranoid part of the film to me. They will look like people. This particular version does that better than any of the subsequent ones. What do you think this movie is about? There's been a lot of discussion over the years of what the subtext of Invasion of the Body Snatchers is. Two opposing ideas that people both see in this film. They'll say, oh, this is about the threat of communism. Everybody says all 50 sci-fi is about communism. Something sneaking into your town and taking it over without you even noticing. Or some people say it's about the Red Scare, it's about McCarthyism. People in a community turning on each other, turning on the outsiders. Anybody who doesn't conform is persecuted.
Well, I think it's about homoeroticism.
Pointedly, the people who made the film, the director, the writers, have said that there's no political metaphor in the film at all. But really, I think all of these movies are about that fear of conformity, the fear of the crowd.
Right.
Who plays the lead character in this film?
McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy, yeah. Starts out seeming like a pretty normal guy, and then as the film goes on, he gets more and more manic, until the end where he's
just mad,
yelling and screaming. What's basically the ending of the story. Runs out into the freeway, starts banging on the hood of cars and the windows and screaming about how, they're already here! You're next!
I find that scene terrifying. Could you imagine what people with less developed horror palettes were like in the 50s? Your grandmother sitting there in the movie theater, your grandmother, not my grandmother.
Okay.
Your grandmother sitting there in the movie theater watching this movie, and then him looking at the screen going, you're next!
Yeah, he breaks the fourth wall. He points at the audience and says, you're next.
I can picture your grandmother.
The devil's in it! Notably, that isn't the actual ending of the movie. That was the envisioned ending. And the studio said, no, you can't do that. That's too spicy a meatball for 1956. We need a happy ending. So it added this obviously chewed-in framing device. It opens with Miles coming into a doctor's office and telling this crazy story, everybody assuming he's insane. It comes back to that at the end. They realize he's right, and the FBI swoops in and saves the day. Everybody ignores that. Even people who've seen this movie for the first time know that the actual ending is when he's on the road screaming about how
you're next!
They're already here. Direction of the movie's great. Don Siegel made this movie very film noir, Dutch angles, lots of shadows. This is a really fantastic movie. I love the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
It's a good movie. It's good, cheesy 50s sci-fi, and I love it.
I guess it is a little cheesy.
It's a good kind of cheesy.
I guess McCarthy is a little hammy, and I guess the setting seems a little quaint to modernize.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The classic fear begins to grow.
We're being cornered.
In a modern masterpiece, from deep space, the seed is planted. Terror grows.
The most notable remake would come about 20 years later, from 1977, and this version was made by Philip Kaufman. For a lot of people, this is the definitive version of the story. This is the one that people really remember. Critically acclaimed film upon release. It's still held in very high regard. And to be totally honest, the first time I saw this one, I didn't like it. It's taken me a couple of viewings to warm up to the 77 version.
So what do you think of it now?
This is a good movie, don't get me wrong. I prefer both the previous and the next version. It's still a good movie. From what you remember, how does this one deviate from the original?
A lot different, actually. The cast of characters is completely different. It doesn't open up with the guy going into the doctor.
Yeah, that whole framing device is gone. The first half of the remake is totally different, and in the second half, it starts pulling more from the original. The character names are similar but different. The lead character isn't Miles Bennell, he's Matthew Bennell. The female lead isn't Becky Driscoll, it's Elizabeth Driscoll. Their friends are still Jack and Nancy. Once the invasion starts in earnest in the second half, a lot of the sequences are taken directly from the original. The heroine and the hero being cornered in a doctor's office by two pod people. A scene where they're hiding and the pod people start singing to try and lure them out. Both have them finding doubles of themselves in the garden. The biggest difference between 77 and 56 is the remake really ups the horror content some more.
Yes.
This one shows explicitly what happens.
I think this one handles the suspense of the situation a little better.
How so?
This one makes you feel the exhaustion of the characters. That is an element that the original was lacking.
The remake's a little longer, so it has a little more time to explore the world, yeah.
It does convey a better, these people really have not slept in days.
That's a valid point. The big difference for me is that it shows you what happens to somebody when they're being replaced. The pods look more like large squash that have a big flower on the end. These fibrous hair-like tentacles go on the person's face while they're sleeping. Their life force or fluids or whatever are being sucked out. There are a lot of moments in this movie that are shocking. What's the most shocking moment for me is when you see what happens to the person after they've been collapsed, like paper, totally hollowed out.
Another really big difference between this one and the original, when you wake up the host body, the pod dies.
They're being copied and you wake them up in time. You can save them. There's freaky shit in this movie. The dog with the human head on it. Throughout the movie, there's this homeless guy playing his banjo, and he's got his dog with him. Later in the movie, I guess the pod got confused. There's this dog running around with this guy's head on. And Stephen King's Dance Macabre, which is a nonfiction book he wrote about the horror genre, he talks about this movie. And he referred to the sequence where Donald Sutherland smashes the copy's face, and he said, the most graphic, realistic blood I've ever seen in a PG movie. But I really do find the original scarier, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, this movie isn't set in a little small town like Santa Mira. This is set in San Francisco. There isn't the safety of the small community being perverted in this film. It deals a lot with urban isolation. A notable moment, Elizabeth really starts to get scared. She notices that people are talking to each other. People aren't ignoring each other in the street. Everybody's talking to each other, and that freaks her out.
I think it's actually the exact opposite of what you're saying. It's almost like they're taking these people with big city upbringing, and these body snatchers come in and they snatch the bodies. People start acting like small town personalities. That's what freaks her out.
A lot of it just has to do with how the times had changed between 56 and 77, you know? The world was a much different place. When we think of the pop culture image of what a pod person is, not the original so much. This one is the one that we think of. They move more robotically, they speak flatly, and most famously, when a person who isn't a copy has been spotted, what do, JD?
They point and screech.
Yeah, they release this hellish noise.
You know,
there are moments, there's one specific moment at the very end of this film where that is scary as hell, but the initial image of these people pointing and making this horrible noise, I don't know, I feel like it removes a little bit of the subtlety. Not gonna piss on that ending, though, because that ending is fucking incredible.
Pretty terrifying.
Yeah, Veronica Carlson's character is the last human left in the city, and he points and releases this god-awful noise, and the camera crash zooms on his face and credits. Whoa, that's some good movie making. The meaning of the original film. One of the reasons why this remake is good, it changes the meaning. The reason I really wanted to do this episode is each of these movies say so much about the time period they were made in. You really get to see the fears of the culture evolve. This one's all about 70s disconnection. All the characters are incredibly neurotic. Sutherland's character, Matthew, he's a health inspector. One of the first scenes is he goes into a French restaurant and he pulls something out of the stew and says, "What is that?" Restaurant owner says, "Well, that's a caper." And he says, "It's a rat turd." "No, it's a caper. If it's a caper, eat it." The female lead, she's trapped in a loveless relationship. Her boyfriend, even before he gets snatched, doesn't seem to really have much time for her. Jack and Nancy, Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Carlson, are like the two most neurotic characters in cinema history. Goldblum's character is obsessive-compulsive. He's the struggling author, very shaky all the time, but he's just Jeff Goldblum in that response.
Those two are also the most likable characters in the movie.
Yeah! Cartwright's character, Nancy, she talks about how can't drink public water, there's poison in the water. There's this cloud of paranoia in the movie, and everybody's seeking answers. An important character in this version that isn't in the previous one is the self-help guru played by Leonard Nimoy.
Seriously, get ready to say Spock.
Dr. Kibner is the character name, and he, I think, is very much based off of this guy from the 70s, Thomas Anthony Harris, who wrote a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. Nimoy, he's so perfectly cast as this drawl voice of authority, dismissed everybody's problem. He said, "Oh, it's all in your head." In this movie, the aliens promising a world without fear or anger or love is really appealing to these characters because they're all massively fucked up, like real people. I understand that. One of the reasons why this version has never appealed to me as much. I didn't live through the 70s. It's a cultural thing, maybe.
I like it.
Great cast.
Oh, yeah.
Donald Sutherland is the lead, and he's great. I always loved Sutherland. Brooke Adams is the name of the actress who plays the female lead. I know her from The Dead Zone.
Okay.
Goldblum is always entertaining, but Veronica Cartwright is doing a test run of the character she would play in Alien in this movie, because they both panic. Cartwright is great at panicking.
Oh, yeah!
Yeah, Philip Kaufman's direction looks really good. Lots of deep shadows, lots of intimate camera angles. The musical score in this movie is incredibly creepy.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what I find most scary about this film?
What's that?
Is the foot shots.
The foot shots?
They just shoot their feet while they're running. Like, I don't know why, but that always really intensified the suspense for me. Like,
oh, and you know who has a cameo in this one? At the very beginning, you see a priest on a swing set. That's Robert Duvall. When I was watching this film, I said, is that Robert Duvall? No, there's no way they'd get a big actor like that for a cameo. And then I looked it up, and yeah, it is him for some reason. I don't know. Is this your favorite of the 4 versions?
I don't know. It's a toss-up between this one and the next one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the next version, which I find very underrated.
There's something in the air, and it feels like fear. There's something in the night, and it seems like terror. There's someone in your bed, and it looks like you. Life will be simpler now. The only thing missing will be you.
Where are you gonna go? Where are you gonna run? Where are you gonna hide? Nowhere, because there's no one like you left.
The invasion continues.
In 1994, they did yet another one. This time, just Body Snatchers. They left off the invasion of. This film was made by a filmmaker named Abel Ferrara, who has made a lot of really interesting movies. He made King of New York with Christopher Walken, the original Bad Lieutenant with Harvey Keitel. I call 1994's Body Snatchers a remake, but it really isn't.
Way different.
Yeah, it's a new story. The lead character is a teenage girl named Marty. Her dad is an EPA agent, moves the family from military base to military base. She has a little brother and a stepmom. They move onto this military base, and she notices that maybe this is a little weird, but she's a teenage girl, so she thinks that. But the military base has been taken over by the pods, prepping an invasion, as they have been known to do.
And this has the best pod special effects in all of it.
Really love the effects in this one.
Very Cronenbergian. Or
Well,
Cronenberg-esque?
Cronenbergian, I think is the term.
Cronenbergian?
The pods themselves are not super impressive looking. They've dried up seed pods.
That's intentional.
The difference between 77 and 94 in terms of effects.
It even looks like they have amniotic fluid. And
They really play up the invasion of your orifices. When you're sleeping, these noodly things
go up in your nose.
and your ears and your eyes and your mouth, and they're sucking something out of you. And while that's happening, the clone is forming inside of the pod, and it's a very messy process. It does have some elements from the 77 version. People collapse after they've been cloned. The pod people point and scream. But overall, it is a new story. This is something that all of Abel Ferrara's movies have. All his movies have the same tone as this one. The sense that something very, very bad could happen at any point. What makes the 94 version so creepy to me is the sense that the pods have already won. This very creepy tone, the sense of unease that runs throughout the whole movie.
And the setting really helps it, too.
The military base setting is important. The secret subtext of this movie is that what the military does to people and what the pods do to people are not too dissimilar, because they both drain away your humanity.
Plus, this movie came out right after the Gulf War.
Yeah, it was directly in that time. I think that was on people's minds. Something else I noticed while watching it also is about teenage isolation. By making the main character a teenager, anytime a teenager comes into a new town, they have the sense that the people here aren't right. The teenage girl's right. The people in the town really aren't normal.
And then in this one, the pod people, they act completely differently than they have in any other film. They act like the same person that they were before, but with heightened aggression. So they're not robotic, zombie-esque type of character from the 77 series, and they're not just carbon copies of the hosts like they are in the 56 movie.
The main one I think of is the stepmom, played by Meg
because
Tilly.
we see her change.
Meg Tilly is so good in this. If the Phantom Awards existed in 1994, that's supporting actress material right there. Because that scene where Dad and the two kids are getting ready to leave the house because they realize what's going on, and she's on the phone, and she says, "Where are you going to run? Where are you going to go? There's nobody like you left." It's so creepy. I think this movie is genuinely scary. Andy's the little brother. He walks in and he sees his mom's body, just collapses. The pod person, nude, comes out of the closet. That's a scary-ass moment to me. Or when Gabrielle Anwar is in the bath, she dozes off in the bath. Noodly appendages are on her face. The pod person is in the ceiling above her, and it gets heavy enough. This featureless nude body falls on top of her, and that wakes her up. And at the same time, the dad's being copied. This half-formed, corpse-like pod person comes from under the bed and grabs his leg. Scary shit, man.
Yeah, this movie will fuck with you.
And some of the smaller scenes are scary, too. When the little boy is in kindergarten, and all the kids hold up their pictures they've drawn, and all of them have drawn the exact same picture except for him.
Even closer to the end, when all the pod people are after everyone, it looks like a fucking war zone. This is the only movie to really show that level of apocalypse.
Yeah, the wide-scale invasion.
This makes the pod people more active in getting rid of the human population.
There's that scene where they're walking through the hospital room and you see all of these pod people laid out. It's succession. The humans are collapsing and dying, and the pods are getting up. The one scene that's in every one of these movies, when the lead characters are walking around pretending to be one of the pods, they're not showing emotion. And inevitably something happens in each version that makes them stop. In the original, a dog is walking across the street and gets hit by a car. This one, they're walking along and they see the friend, and they say something to her about, I know where they're keeping your little brother. The lead character, Marty, pauses and looks to her and says, where? And then the friend points and screams. Another interesting thing, you can trick them. Eventually they're going to get... Now, what do you think of the cast in this film?
Good cast. It's not a name brand.
There are no big actors in this movie.
Big name, yeah, that's
Gabrielle Anwar plays Marty, and I don't know if you ever watched the show Burn Notice.
I've seen it.
She was the female lead on that show. I like her a lot in this. Billy Wirth, one of the Lost Boys, young soldier who is sympathetic. All the other soldiers are sort of meatheady, and he seems pretty down to earth. We've already mentioned Meg Tilly, who I think is fantastic. The Tilly sisters are all very talented.
Yes, talented.
You know who else is in this movie who plays the head general on the base? Arlie Ermey.
You mean... I bet if you were fucking a guy in the ass, you wouldn't have the common goddamn decency to give a guy a reach around earlier.
That's the one. He's playing a very different type of character in this movie. He's not Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in this. He's the opposite of that. He's very low-key, which of course works. You know who else is in this movie? Forrest Whitaker.
You mean Chitwittle Ejiofor?
No, not Chitwittle Ejiofor. This is the 1994 version of Chitwittle Ejiofor.
Oh, okay.
He's the major on the base who knows what's going on. There are some things that don't work. The lead character has a voiceover narration, shows up a couple times and is superfluous. The only scene that makes me chuckle in this movie is when they're on the helicopter trying to get away and the little boy turns and attacks them. Yeah, that is a bit goofy.
Wrongly utilized.
Quote-unquote scary kids in horror movies is something that usually takes me out of the film. As revenge, they blow up the trucks carrying the pods out, but there's still the sense that it's still too late.
That's a pretty effective scene.
I do love that final shot where they're landing on a new military base and they replay the line earlier from the movie about, there's nobody like you left. And then it says the end on screen, as if the end of the human race is the implication there. I love the original, but I think this one might be my favorite.
It's definitely the most entertaining of any of them.
It's a seriously underrated film. You never hear very much about this version.
I think it has an uprising.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten an audience. And notably, Roger Ebert was a big fan of this film. He was the only critic that gave it a good review when it came out.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is it important for people not to touch it?
It's contaminated. Could be contaminated.
Something's happening. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it. Have you noticed anything?
I have.
My husband is not my husband.
Doesn't hurt.
Imagine a world where human beings cease to be human.
The change occurs when the body undergoes REM sleep.
You can fool them.
What?
Don't show emotion. Then they can't tell who's who.
By the time 2007 came around, it was probably time for a new one. What's the version from 2007 called?
The Invasion.
They left off of the Body Snatchers this time. This one strays the furthest from the original source material. Has so little to do with the Body Snatcher concept. This was a troubled production. They had two different directors. The movie was directed originally Oliver Hirschbiegel, German director who made a movie about Hitler called Downfall. He shot the film, and the studio was not pleased with what he did, so they brought in James Mateague, who made V for Vendetta and Ninja Assassin, and they had the Wachowskis of the Matrix fame rewrite the script. Two different directors, three different writers, $10 million in reshoots. They even managed to break Nicole Kidman's ribs. She was in a car wreck on the set and she broke 3 ribs. Each remake of the Body Snatchers is a different take on it. 70s version is the 70s auteur theory version. The 90s is the 90s special effects creature feature. And this is Invasion of the Body Snatchers as generic modern day blockbuster. The story for The Invasion is Carol Bennell is the character, and she's a successful psychiatrist. She's recently split from her husband. Oliver is her little boy, and she's dating a doctor. Anyway, at the beginning of the movie, a space shuttle explodes in orbit. All this wreckage rains down over the countryside, and with this wreckage comes a spore from outer space. And any trading of bodily fluid causes you to be infected with this bacteria, and if you fall asleep, the bacteria will take you over, and your body will be taken over by a mindless alien intelligence. Quite a bit different from the previous versions. There are no pod people in this film. There are no pods, which is Stupid. Why in God's name would you tell the story? Cut out the pods.
You tell me. Nicole Kidman gets spit at like 50 times in the movie. And this movie is very much about the spread of disease through, we might as well say through sexual contact.
It's not sex. It's a fear of bodily fluids.
The guy spits in her mouth.
Yeah, he holds her down and spits on her, yeah. Like I said, each of these movies say something about the culture they're made in. On our last episode, I was talking about what zombies mean to our culture. The modern-day revival of interest in zombies speaks to our modern-day anxiety about disease and epidemics. And this movie is all about that, too. By doing that, it makes it into a generic zombie movie, because you have the pod people, or if you can even call them that, vomiting this green goo at people. It's ridiculous.
It's spider webs over their face.
Totally a ridiculous visual. The scene where she's running off the train, and there are all these people being spit on. The most egregious part of this remake is that you can save the people once they've been turned. Bullshit, yeah, I mean, it completely negates the point. If you can save somebody after they've been body snatched, then what the hell are we even fighting for? It's a disease, some variation of chickenpox. Once somebody's been infected, the bacteria can't take them over. That pissed me off more than anything else about this movie, which I did not like. Truthfully, I don't even know how much of this movie we can blame on the credited director, because it's very clear where the reshots happen. There are scenes in the movie that almost work. When it's focusing on Nicole Kidman and her friends, they're pretending not to have emotions so they won't be detected. Those are the best moments in the film. But then in the last act, she's in a car, the infectees are jumping on top of the car, banging on the glass, and she swings the car and tosses them through windows. It's like, what the fuck is going on here? And she's driving down the street with the front of the car on fire. Suddenly it becomes a bad action movie.
And we like bad action movies, so what's that tell you?
Yes, exactly! So I don't know how much of this movie is the original director's fault, how much of it is James McTeague's fault, how much of it is the Wachowski's fault, how much of it is Nicole Kidman's fault.
All of it.
She seems not invested in the material.
This was done in Nicole Kidman's I'm just here to make a paycheck phase before she finally retired and left us alone.
The thing with Nicole Kidman is when she's really engaged with the material, she can be a good performer, but she is prone to sleepwalking through stuff. And this is definitely a scenario where she does. And who plays her boyfriend?
I don't even remember.
Daniel Craig. I almost said James Bond. You can tell that Daniel Craig is trying to add some personality to his role. There's nothing there. This film does have a cute callback to the 70s version. Veronica Cartwright's in this movie too. She plays the patient who comes into Kidman's office and says, "My husband isn't my husband." We should have talked about how the 77 version had Kevin McCarthy in it. And a great cameo at the beginning of the movie, he runs across Donald Sutherland's car and stamps on the glass and says, you know, they're here, they're already here, you're next. Which almost makes that remake feel like a sequel to the original.
Yeah.
I hate the invasion a lot. I hate the ending where they fucking save the world, but then there's this dumb twist where they say, well, maybe we were better off with the Body Snatchers. No wars and no random crime. Maybe things were better. Give me a fucking break. You can't spend your whole movie saying, this alien invasion that steals our emotion is bad, and then in the last 2 minutes say, no, it was good.
The emotion thing is the worst in this movie. They just make them mindless drones, make them zombies. They don't utilize that.
They act emotionless until the script needs them to show emotion. The whole movie's...
Studio meddling is this movie's problem.
Oh, yeah.
And they needed to recast Nicole Kidman.
With some of the ideas in the script I hate, so I don't know if it could have been good, but the director, he's made good films before, so who knows. That's the latest alliteration and definitely my least favorite. This concept has been ripped off and referenced and homaged a bunch of times, and I just want to throw a few of these in here real quick. I think in our Alien Invasion episode, we mentioned a movie from 1963 called The Day Mars Invaded Earth, which is basically the original movie without the pod, a very similar body snatcher premise and a very slow, boring 60s science fiction film. I haven't seen this one. There's a movie from 69 called The Body Stealers, which seems like a pretty blatant reference in the title there. What do you think about the Stepford Wives in relation to this series of films? They're sort of similar, aren't they?
Yeah, very similar.
People being replaced by emotionless copies. And another thing Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the Stepford Wives have in common, they both got crappy remakes starring Nicole Kidman.
No snap!
In Halloween 3, the town where the toy factory is called Santa Mira. Homage there. On our Alien Invasion episode, we mentioned a movie called Strange Invaders and The Puppet Masters, which even has Donald Sutherland in it, and The Faculty. All are telling similar stories. There's a movie from 1983 called Pod People, which is famous for being featured on Mystery Science Theater. And despite what the title says, it doesn't actually have anything to do with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's actually a Italian ripoff of E.T., but E.T. has a horror movie. There's a full moon version called Seed People.
Really?
Yeah, Charles Band actually directed this one. It's from 92, so right in the classic era of Full Moon.
Well, we'll have to find this at the next horror movie.
I wonder if it's any good. Never really know what you're getting from Charlie Band.
Yeah, this is like prime Full Moon.
Before they ran out of money.
Yeah, it's
good.
like back in like the Shrunken Heads, Dark Angel subspecies.
Yeah,
series.
yeah. There was a TV show in 2005 called Invasion, which apparently drew Invasion of the Body Snatchers as a TV show, but I never watched watched it. Know
I
anything
don't
about
remember
it?
anything.
Yeah, it only ran for a season. When The Invasion came out, the Asylum produced a ripoff called Invasion of the Pod People. I haven't seen it. I've seen a couple other Asylum movies, so I know what to expect. And apparently in this one, when a woman becomes a pod person, she becomes a lesbian.
Well, of course.
Some added blatant exploitation. There's even a version of the story starring Bugs Bunny.
Oh.
Invasion of the Bunny Snatchers from 1992, which we watched right before we recorded. That little short is making fun of low-budget animation. All of Bugs Bunny's adversaries are replaced by these badly animated facsimiles. And you know what? There's even a porn version. Disappointingly not called Invasion of the Booty Snatchers. I mean, that's obvious. No, the porn version is called The Incredible Body Snatchers, which doesn't even sound like a porn movie.
The curiosity is getting the best of me here.
Considering how many times the story has been retold, we will probably get another remake in our lifetime. Right now, the big thing is to turn classic horror movies into TV shows. This one I could almost see working as a serialized television show.
Oh, yeah. Actually have the time to tell the story.
Yeah, you could probably stretch out to 12 hours and have it make sense.
Yeah.
If you want to shriek at us hellishly, you may do so at bangersinmash88@yahoo.com. That's the email. The show's on SoundCloud now. I will put the link to our SoundCloud account in the episode description. Thank you, Manuel, for the very nice words you left on the previous episode. We appreciate that so much. And we got some more likes from some new people on the Facebook group that I didn't recognize. As always, thank you to all our listeners and all our fans, everybody on Facebook and YouTube. Getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, Mr. Mash, I really feel like you're not yourself. It's kind of freaking me out. You're not going to replace me with a pod, are you?
Oh, no, but I do just want you to eat these Brussels sprouts.
I don't like Brussels sprouts. They're here! You're next!
With a pickle mind, we kick the nipple beer. Steady as a goat, we're flying over trout. Ghetto down the highway at the speed of light. All I wanna feel now is the wind in my eyes. Sack of monkeys in my pocket. My sister's ready to go. Hear the engines roll now. Idiot control now. Hideous control now. Nitty on the road now. Mini in control, wheels on fire, burning rubber tires. Leary jelly rolls now. Hit it, let's go now. Nitty inches bow down. Pity in a poor boy. Pity inches roll. Bees on pie, burning rubber tires.
Oh, great. Pretty good. What do you think?
It stinks.